All right. And we are off. Welcome everyone to Thursday Explorations. It's June 29th, 2023. Feels like the future, huh? And here we're here today to talk a little about waking up the world. In other words, almost everyone here, maybe everyone here, has already gone through or is in the middle of your own awakening process. But an important part of this is taking it out to the world, starting with the people around you, right? But how do we do this? And what's it going to take for some of these spiritual teachings to be spread, shared, and adopted on a much wider scale than, an online course with 7 people or, a seminar with 20. And so we're going to do the format a little different here. We brought Nick Grant in to do this sort of in podcast interview style, which I think may be a little more fun. That being said, this is not a podcast, and we're going to strongly encourage everyone to interact and participate. Because again, if we wanted to just record this with no audience and put it up to watch later, we would do that. We could do it whenever we wanted, right? We do it as a scheduled live event because we want people to participate. So let's get to it, waking up the world. Our host will be Nick Grant, dating coach extraordinaire, and another one of the clients and students of my former dating coach, Brian, who led me to Carl. So it's very interesting that Nick found me because he worked with Brian and was like, damn, Carl's dead. Now what do I do? So here we are. So, Nick, what would you like to know about waking up the world?
Yeah, actually, this is something we've talked quite a bit about personally, and I just have consistently had some questions. So I'm just going to start us off with a few questions. Say and I encourage everybody, like Brent's going to answer these questions, because it's something I feel Brent is very passionate about. But if anybody at some point during this conversation has a really strong answer yourself, like you see exactly how this applies, please share, like type it in. Just unmute and start talking, please. Share yourself here, but I'm going to go ahead and just get it kicked
Also,
off. And
just remember for everyone watching live, the people watching on the recording won't see the chat room. So we'd encourage you to share live. All right, let's do it. So what you got for me, Nick? What can I answer for you about waking up the world?
Yeah. So I'm a very practical person. And so I want to ask you, what are some practical ways in which teaching and sharing awakening can contribute to personal and social evolution?
Yeah, so I would say the first thing that comes to mind is there's an old saying, as above, so below. And we've seen this in philosophy, theology, spiritual literature for centuries, if not millennia. And one of the things that my late mentor Carl used to teach is that our lives and the whole world, the whole universe, are holographic. What does that mean? That every little part contains the whole within it. And it's interesting that the latest advances in science, the physics of the last 10, 20 years, also seems to be pointing us to that same thing, that scientists are discovering the universe is holographic. And in some of Carl's articles, the ones I share privately with my Awakening Intensive group, one of the teachings is that the world you experience is a holographic projection. And your projector is your mind and body. That there is some higher truth that gets fed as information into the body-mind mechanism to create this experience of a 3-dimensional world around us. So what does this have to do with awakening? Well, I think it's pretty simple that our own personal journeys parallel and holographically represent the progress of the world. That's what it means. And those of you that have followed my work for a while, I talk about this when I say that many of us have gone through our own pain and conflict that leads us to some kind of growth, learning, healing, and then we emerge stronger. And many of us have experienced that. Maybe it's a disease or a job loss or some kind of, financial thing. But we want to recognize that the process we go through as individuals mimics the progress of society. And so to understand the way that we wake up the world, the first place you want to look is in the mirror. because the way that you wake up one person is the same way you wake up the whole planet. And for a lot of us, we get into this new age stuff, energy healing, intuition, mind power, whatever it may be. The most common reason is a health crisis. It's not the only one. Some of us are lucky and wise enough to not need our lives to collapse or have some terrible disease or pain or whatever to make a shift, to find a new way. But it is certainly the most common. It was how I got into this stuff. It's how all of my most important teachers got into it. Terry O'Connell had her own major health crisis that almost killed her, led her to energy healing. Carl Wolf had a major health crisis that left him paralyzed for 3 years, led him to this stuff, right? And so if we look at the journey we're on as individuals, there's that form of, you think you know everything when we're young, right? And then crap happens to you and you realize you don't know everything. And through some combination of desperation and pain, you make a choice to go outside your own box. That, I can say for certain that in the 90s, when I had my tech companies and started to have chronic pain, if I could have just gone to a doctor, if the doctor had cured my pain, I never would have looked at this stuff, at least not right away. That I had always been interested in mysticism and the occult and consciousness, but it never seemed front burner, right? Then I had this horrific health crisis, and it was a little over 3 years ago now. So not 20, I can't talk, can't think. Susie, it must have been around March, April 1998, so 25 years ago, that the head doctor at Curlin Job literally sent me home to die. He said, Brent, there's no chance you'll ever recover. I don't think you'll ever be able to work again. I'm going to do you a favor and recommend you for lifetime disability. And that was actually important because basically, if the best of the best in the medical system gives up on you, you got to look somewhere else, right? I wasn't okay with spending my whole life watching daytime TV and living on disability. I'm not sure I couldn't have even made it, but that's a whole nother discussion, right? And so it was that desperation and pain that led me to open my mind. First to alternative medicine, then later to energy healing and more of the new age stuff. And so
I've got a question along these lines. Yeah. So when it comes to, seeking spiritual awakening or awakening at all, a high pressure, like, being very sick or ill, is definitely one of the ways that reaches people the quickest.
Yeah.
And, the most intensely. And so what are some other effective strategies? Like, how can we reach people to engage with awakening before, their life is threatened?
It's interesting. That one thing I saw in both Terry and Carl that Brent hasn't been as good at is both of them were willing to make big changes without necessarily being forced to do so. So, example, when Carl quit his job at Siemens, he was a vice president of the company in his 20s, had 2,000 people working for him. And he just woke up one day and quit, put his stuff in the back of a car, drove across the country to California, having no idea where he'd live or how he would support himself. When the energy healing saved her life, she just put in her notice. It wasn't overnight like Carl, but she put in her notice at her job. I think she was making like 170 grand a year, which is pretty good, like 20 some years ago. And I remember getting her email that said, hey, everyone, I want you to know I quit my job at Arco and I'm going to be a professional energy healer. And this was months before I had my session with her and my elbow healed. I thought she was nuts, right? The Alchemist is largely a story about this. About the guy gets into a difficult situation, turns it around, and then walks away from a good thing. But that doesn't work for everyone. That's certainly a minority. And so one of the things that I've learned that I want to share with everyone here is a simple teaching that there's two primary ways we learn in this world. Anyone want to hazard a guess? What are the two primary ways that we learn things on and learn a better way?
Making mistakes.
What's that?
Making mistakes.
Okay, I thought you said having sex. I'm like, that sounds like a good way, right? I suppose that could be a mistake in and of itself. But yeah, making mistakes, that's one of them. And it's very close.
We learn a new way when it isn't working the first way.
Yep. So learning from our own mistakes is answer number one. So you do something and it doesn't work out well and you go, damn, that wasn't such a good idea, right? And we don't do it again. What's the other way that we can learn?
From other people's mistakes.
There we go. Right. Thank you. That wasn't so hard, right? So we can learn from our own mistakes or we can learn from other people's. And so I want to call back to the hologram that our personal lives show this kind of trajectory, that we go, we make mistakes, we learn from them. And if we're wise enough and open enough, we can learn from other people's mistakes too. We don't necessarily have to repeat them. And as a society, it's the same thing. We can learn from our own mistakes, bad laws, bad policies, bad wars, etc. Or we can learn from someone else's, which in terms of society is usually about history. There was a saying, who said it? Was it Mark Twain? I don't think so, but that those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So I would say that right now, if we look out into the world, there's a lot of problems. It feels like there's more problems out there right now than there have been in my lifetime. I'm not sure how one would objectively measure that. It feels that way, right? And so here's the thing, that there is a solution that's already been developed for just about every problem that we have. There is already a solution. The question is, do we have the will to adopt the solution? Are we willing to make a sacrifice? Are we willing to work together? Or do we see life as just a zero-sum game where we fight like mad to get more for ourselves and screw everyone else, right? And so when we talk to other people, try to lead them to the path of awakening, I would say we have to put it in terms they will understand and respond to. And I would say one of the effective ways is identify what their big problem is and then offer them a potential solution. Not everyone's going to listen, because there are certain people, a lot of people, that don't really want solutions. They just want to have problems. And bonding over our problems is all too common. This is one of my personal critiques against some elderly people, not all of them, mainly aimed at my family, that in my family at least, you get a bunch of people over 50, 60 together, they start competing over who has the biggest medical issue. And it's this big complaint fest, right? I'm not sure how healthy that is. Because if you're feeling rewarded for having a bigger medical problem than the next person, what are you going to create, right? And so I would say part of this is it's like a sales process, that when we're offering awakening, we're in a sense selling it, and everything is a negotiation. That first we need to understand what that person's issue or problem is that drives them to take action, right? Then we need to agitate the problem a little bit so they can really feel it, and then offer a solution. And so for Brent, awakening was offered to me more than once, right? Over and over. When I really felt ready for it, what was really the critical thing, that up to a certain point in my spiritual maturity, I was focused on my problems and I just wanted those problems solved. I didn't want to have to change myself, right? That, I'll just say money as an example, that I've struggled with money a lot in my adult life. A lot less since I met Carl Wolf, but still to some degree. And when I was younger, really, I wasn't interested in being free on the inside. I just wanted to have the money. I'm like, yeah, spiritual freedom, that's great for, the Buddha and, people in impossible situations, but, I just want money. And I wasn't as interested in being okay with my problems, if that makes sense. And at a certain point of spiritual maturity, which ironically happened after I started to make more money, I realized that I was making more money, but I was just about as miserable as I was before. Most of us will see about a 6-month gap there. It's a period of psychological inflation. Those of you that have done level 4, the awakening intensive, that's one of the big topics. That you start making more money, it feels great for a while, and then you're right back to the same you. And I realized, hey, that making more money isn't really going to make me happy. That there's a certain setting inside of me to create suffering. And you can give someone all the money, all the sex, all the fame, all the security, whatever, right? And they're still going to be creating the same level of suffering. And I think, again, to mimic the sales process, understand what their issue is, agitate it a little bit so they can really feel it, and then offer them a solution. And if they're ready for it, maybe they'll take you up on it. And it's funny that one of the things I'll share with everyone, and this is a little trick, I forget where I learned it, but like many of you, I'm on all these different email lists, right? Between my business and personal and other things, I generally get between 1 and 200 emails every day. But 70-80% of it is automated, right? Lists and, offers and webinars and new books, all that stuff, right? And I don't have time to read all of them, right? Who does? And so I intuitively just kind of look at the subject, and most of the time I'm just delete, 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 right? But every now and then there's a certain resonance. It's almost like I see it in bold. And that's my intuition saying, hey, Brent, pay attention to this. And I forget how I got on this email list, but I got one about this guy named Jean, who was teaching a class called The Psychology of Consciousness. And on the surface, I wouldn't have gone for it. I'm like, oh, psychology, whatever, right? But there was that resonance. And I read the email, and he made this claim. He said, if you were to offer me $1 billion in cash to lose my awakening, I would laugh at you and say no. And that intrigued me. And I'm mentioning this because that's where kind of that worked for me where I was at. Because I recognized I had this problem of struggling with money and scarcity, right? And I realized that having more money wasn't really solving the problem. It papered it over for a while. I knew the real problem was on the inside. And when I saw that, I thought it was kind of a come on, but he offered the first class was free. And so I'm like, why not, right? But it showed up and offered me a solution that was pretty much a direct hit for the problem I had. And that was the night that awakening happened in this guy, which is interesting because Terry had told me a lot of this stuff. Carl had told me a lot of this stuff over and over, but either the way they presented it didn't resonate, or I wasn't ready, or both. That I needed a nerdy engineer to present it in a way that my brain could get it. So I would say, understand where people are at. It's almost impossible to convince people that there's abstract value in something that, one, is not what they're looking for, and two, may not even be something that they envision exists. And this is kind of the crux of the problem with sharing awakening, that very few people walk around all day thinking, oh my God, I have a lack of internal freedom. Oh my gosh, I'm too much caught up in a victim mindset. No one does that, right? Wow, why am I creating so much suffering where it's not necessary? Very few people do that. People walk around all day thinking, oh, gee, I need some more money. Oh, gee, I want to have more sex. Oh, gee, my back hurts. I want it to stop, right? So we have to bridge that gap. We have to offer them the solution in a way that they will recognize that's close enough to their problem they can see that it might solve it, right? And awakening is difficult because Yeah.
It's almost like awakening is necessary to even ask the questions necessary to seek
Absolutely.
awakening.
That's why it's so difficult. Not only is it something people aren't looking for the most part, there are exceptions, but it's something they don't even know exists, right? Who goes around looking for something that you don't even know exists? The answer is nobody. Mike, you have something to say,
Hey.
please.
Yeah, before you might be getting to this, but can you define what you mean by awakening? Or are you talking about
Oh,
a
sure.
non-dual awakening?
Yeah. I would say awakening is just another word for non-duality. Advaita Vedanta, it's all the same thing. It's just, I don't see there's a lot of, I think there's more semantic content accessible to the average person calling it awakening versus non-duality. But awakening is very simple. It's coming to a crystal clear understanding of what you are. That's all it is. Awakening does not mean, in this vocabulary, does not mean energy healing or intuition or mind power or manifesting or a belief in any certain theology or metaphysical principles. No. That's metaphysics and philosophy and theology, which is cool stuff in its own right. But awakening is a very specific and precise thing. It's understanding what are you. And what one of my reactions to awakening was the first instant there was freedom. It felt amazing. The next reaction was I felt nauseous, like I'd been hit in the gut. Because I realized I'd spent my entire life, I was in my 40s at this point, thinking I knew what I was. And suddenly I recognized that I didn't. And it was like, oh crap, right? I used to think I was so smart. I knew so many things. How could someone that's actually that smart spend decades of their life being totally ass backwards wrong about this super powerful fundamental thing, right? It's like a mathematician that can't do arithmetic. Doesn't make sense, right? And so that's what I mean by awakening. That, I don't mean, again, it's
While we're
not
on,
about intuition or angels or mind power or healing or the planes of it. No, it's just about what is you. What is this you that is aware and conscious, that has thoughts and feelings and experiences? What exactly is that? And it's crazy. Most people never stop to ask that question. Almost all of you here have. That's probably why you're here, right? And I hope you do. In case you guys don't know, I have an answer. I give it in the 30 Days to Awakening program and in the level 1, level 4, level 3, 2 intensives. And if I could wake you all up in 10 minutes, I would. I'm not sure how to do that. It takes hours. For most people, somewhere between 3 and 8 hours. So does that help, Mike?
you
Yeah.
mentioned something as you were talking about your personal awakening.
Yep.
And it's the feeling of nausea afterwards.
Yep.
Can you explain some of the potential risks, negative consequences of awakening individuals?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we want to recognize that I want everyone to be careful who you share this with. Seriously. Be careful. I have caused problems and damage with people, some of them very close and important to me, because I taught them things they weren't ready to learn. And so I'm going to give you guys a quick story, then I'll talk more about the specifics of awakening. And the story is about jujitsu. That when I was in college, I was in grad school, I was super into martial arts. And I remember I must have been junior, senior in college. And I had heard through the internet about this thing no one had ever heard of called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And when I was home on a spring break, I had gone to the local martial arts store where I lived in Southern California, where my parents lived, I guess, since I was living at MIT, right? And I talked to the owner and I'm like, is there anybody that teaches Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? And he laughed. He goes, yeah, Brent, it's funny you ask. There's a guy I know who's like his second cousin is from Brazil. He's a professor of jiu-jitsu, a master. And he had just come to the United States and he was teaching private lessons for $20 an hour. right? And, I was broke at the time, but I still did like 2 or 3 lessons. And the dude showed up in a pickup truck. His name was Joe Morera. He was in the UFC, he's legit. And he threw down some mats. And basically the first day he just kicked my ass every way to Sunday. And I thought I was a badass, right? I was a black belt in Taekwondo, had done years of Aikido and Judo and all this stuff. I was helpless against Joe. Oh my God. And he showed me some techniques, some chokeholds and arm locks and grappling stuff, right? And what happened was when I was back at MIT, one of my buddies, Alan, his cousin came to visit. And I think he was 16 in high school. And one of the things that we would do when we were partying is Alan and my buddy Mike had also been really into martial arts. And there was another woman, Robin, who had done a lot of karate. We'd be hanging out in the lounge, drinking beer or whatever, and playing around, sharing martial arts techniques. And I remember I was there and Alan was there with his cousin. I don't remember his cousin's name. Doesn't matter. And I was showing them some of the chokeholds I learned from Joe. And it didn't even cross my mind that they might be misused. Because me and my buddies, we were all mature, relatively mature adults, all like 21, 22, right? None of us was going to go start a fight. But what happened was the 16-year-old cousin learned the stuff, went back to his high school, and started bullying people and choked some kid unconscious at lunchtime. And not only was he suspended, he was arrested. Now, it all worked out okay. They dropped the charges and he had to go to some counseling, but that's my story to scare a little bit of sense into us. That the teachings that, say, a 21-year-old with lots of martial arts training can absorb, and there's no danger to it, right? Because, for me and my buddies, we were mature enough, because one of the things you learn in martial arts is you learn martial arts not to win fights, but to avoid them, right? The fighting and winning is meant for tournaments or when you have no other choice. That you teach someone something they're not ready to learn, it can become very dangerous. And so I want to call out, in order to be ripe for awakening, one must be near the top of the Victor scale, 490s at least. If you're not ready for it, it will cause harm. Because what will happen is if you teach awakening to people that aren't ready, they will use it as an excuse to be victims. Because they'll go, oh, gee, why am I dragging my ass out of bed every morning to sit in traffic to drive to a job I hate? If it's all just fated in God's will, I'm just going to stay home and drink beer and watch daytime TV, right? So that's not a functional behavior. That's not what awakening is about. That you only wake up high-level victors that have the victor mentality and skill set deeply drilled in enough that they're not going to abandon it. And so I know I would hope for all of us learning that the ego is an illusion and has no actual power. I don't think any of you is just going to stop going to work just because you learned that it's all sort of in the hands of the divine. Why is that? Well, it's simple. Your ego won't let you. That I can say for myself, and I can't speak for any other human, but I'm guessing we're on the same, all on board with this thought, that learning that if I tried to sit around all day drinking beer and watching daytime TV, I would not enjoy it. I'd be stressed out of my mind about, oh God, we got to make the mortgage and school tuition and medical insurance and all these things, right? That when you're deeply conditioned as the victor, you're not just going to throw it out the window because you learned one new fact, right? Very similar to a black belt who's learned from a legitimate martial arts school and teacher is not going to start choking people out because you show them a neat chokehold, right? Their integrity, their self-control, etc., is evolved to the point where you can teach them a dangerous technique and they don't feel the need to go out and show it off or prove it works. I mean, one of the cool martial arts classes I took once was a guy who had been in the German army. He claimed to have been special forces. I don't know if that's true, but he showed us how you kill someone by breaking their neck. He goes, yeah, when you know what you're doing, it's actually not that hard. And I'm not going to show you guys that, right? But the point was, you teach it to people that are ready for it. You know it won't be used unless it's really necessary. And honestly, it's hard for me to envision a situation where I would need to kill someone with my bare hands, right? You can always reach and find something, right? But that's the point. Teaching people awakening is like teaching them a dangerous chokehold or how to kill someone with your bare hands, but spiritually. If they're not ready for it, it can do a lot of harm. And I'm emphasizing this because I'd like to think that nobody here would be in that risk group, right? Just like if I taught chokeholds to a bunch of black belts in karate, I wouldn't be too worried. Because by the time you get your black belt, you should be mature enough to know how to fight without needing to show off or prove it, if that makes sense. But awakening is the spiritual version of that. And so be careful. People need to have the victor skills developed enough that they're really soaked into your nervous system at a deep level. That one of the I had inadvertently shared some awakening with a child, and again, it was similar to the cousin, and he started doing terrible in school. He had taken away. Oh, it doesn't really matter, right? That's my point. And I don't want to pick on a culture too much, but I think it's interesting. And of course, what we're talking about, I'll give you a hint. This is a nation of approximately 1 billion people. So, and there's one nation in the world that I'm aware of that has had the teachings of awakening readily accessible to the general public through religion for thousands of years. That it's not hidden away, it's right there. Anyone know what it is? I gave you a big hint. There's only 2 nations in the world of at least 1 billion population, right?
India?
India, thank you. And what we see in some parts of India, I've never been there. This is secondhand from people I know that have traveled extensively. Brent doesn't really like to travel because I don't fit well in airplanes. It's kind of miserable, right? Try being 6'4" with an arthritic knee and, chronic back pain, dealing with a long distance flight. No, thank you, right? But people I know that have been there go, yeah, there are parts of India where the teachings of non-duality have been corrupted into basically keeping people in their place to justify the caste system. To say that what you do doesn't matter. It's all determined by the gods. And you're supposed to be a slave or, a bus driver or a cook or whatever it is, right? A warrior, a doctor. And so people don't strive. So it's easy to corrupt these things as an excuse for laziness, sloppiness, inaction. So you want to be really careful who you share this with. And I would say on the whole, be conservative. When in doubt, keep your mouth shut. The exception would be someone that expresses direct interest in it. So I'm not too worried about people buying 30 Days to Awakening off my website and having it corrupt their lives. Why is that? Nick or anyone, why is it I'm not worried about that? But yet I'm telling everyone, be careful who you share this with. Seems like a contradiction, right?
Probably not going to buy it.
Yeah, that's that simple. Yeah. If someone's going to go spend their time and money to get this specific answer, they're almost certainly ready for it. I don't know 100%, right? But I have never heard of someone who bought my material that had a really bad long-term experience or it corrupted them or sent them way back. I don't know everyone personally, but I've never heard of that. And so that's very different than, for example, teaching someone who didn't ask for it, right? Right. I
want to take a step back really quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, talking about the caste system in India and potentially using, awakening similarly to the way that religion has often been used.
Yes.
To control And how do we rectify that with the fact that we do still need, garbage men? We do still
Yeah.
need, cooks in our kitchens and
Yep.
like lower, technically lower skill jobs. And we still want those. I still
Absolutely.
want those people
It's
to be
it's
awakened as
interesting
well.
that one of the things I've read in channelings, Brent has never been physically to another planet, right? So, I'm not like that out there. One thing I've read in channelings is that one thing that intelligent beings from other parts of the galaxy find strange and unusual about Earth is that we venerate people that have relatively easy lives. And we do not give gratitude, respect, praise, reward to those that have difficult lives. And what I've read in many places is that in a highly conscious, evolved society, in other words, not Earth in the 21st century yet, right? Not this one, that the people with the most difficult and dangerous and dirty jobs also tend to make the most money and get the most respect. It's the exact opposite of what we have now. That who do we venerate? We venerate the children of billionaires, right? That have reality shows. We venerate actors that make movies. I'm not saying that they don't deserve something, but it's ridiculous that, for example, Elon Musk is worth what, $180 billion or something crazy, right? That he's worth
320 something. Actually.
Yeah, whatever it is, right? It goes up and down, right?
Yeah.
You guys can look it up if you care. That he's worth so much more than every employee at Tesla will ever make for like 1,000 years. And so is he solely responsible for Tesla? Of course not. I don't want to get into worshiping or bashing Elon Musk, but the historical fact is it wasn't his idea or technology. He basically steamrolled the guys that developed it and stole it from them because he was born to a very wealthy family. And without that privilege and opportunity, he'd be a nobody. Is only because his parents were really wealthy. And yes, he worked at it. Yes, he sacrificed for sure. Yes, he has a certain genius. But in a highly evolved society, the ditch diggers, the school teachers, the construction workers, the people providing elder care are held in a very high esteem and are paid a lot more. Why? It's simple. In a highly conscious technological society, nobody has to work. That in a highly evolved society, if you really want to spend your life drinking beer and watching TV, you can do that. That there's enough for everybody, right? But they also would encourage people to find their calling and their passion and go live it out. And some people are called to be teachers. And teachers, I think, are really important, and they're treated atrociously and paid very low for the most part. School administrators make literally 10 times more money and have a much easier job. So who should be making millions and millions of dollars? In a highly evolved society, I don't think it's the actors and the CEOs and the athletes. It's the people that have the dirty jobs because no one has to do them. And I think that little shift alone could make a big difference in our world. If we decided to at least show some respect to people that do the difficult work. Because as Nick said, there are certain dirty jobs that must be done, right? That there are certain things that people die and someone's got to deal with the body. That can't be a pleasant job, right? There are people sick and dying in hospitals and hospices. Someone needs to care for them. That's a dirty job. Oh, we could go on and on and on. And so again, I'll offer every significant problem we have in our world, there's already a solution for. We just don't have the political will to adopt it. Starvation is one that, as of right now, it's my understanding, the earth and the humans on it have enough capacity to create enough food for every human on the planet. No one needs to go hungry. That wasn't always true in the past. But if we worked together and made that a common goal, and we had a spirit of shared sacrifice, if we were all willing to give up something so that children in poor countries didn't have to go to bed hungry and starve, we could solve the problem almost overnight. And, you know, I get that I don't think any of us here are in a high level position or have the wealth or power to move the needle on our own. But the social, economic, political structures we set up make that virtually impossible. That, you know, for all these reasons, right? And this is why in highly evolved societies, they move past the profit motive. Those of you that have read Spiral Dynamics, wonderful book on the subject, the natural process by which we evolve consciousness. And back to what we mentioned earlier, our society, usually we only see big changes in the midst of a major crisis. That the Russian Tsarist government oppressed the people horribly for hundreds of years. It wasn't until the horrors of World War I that the people got fed up enough to do something about it. And, you know, in that case, arguably took a bad system and replaced it with something worse, right? So again, I don't want to get into the politics of it or even the economics of it. But most of us individually and as a society need to be in a moment of huge crisis before we're willing to let go of the old solution and look for a new one. But that also requires clear communication and the freedom to have intellectual debate, which, you know, that was one of the great gifts the Renaissance gave at least Europe. And it propelled European culture forward to lead the world for hundreds of years. And it's a little sad that we're losing it. But the parallel I like to bring up is World War I, that if we were sitting in a salon pretty much anywhere in the industrialized world in 1910, sipping our tea, we would have thought it was unimaginable that the great European powers and empires would largely be gone in 10 years. That would have seemed unimaginable. But then World War I happened. And most of those involved either lost their empire during the war or started to lose it over the next few decades. The result being by the end of World War II, pretty much all those big European empires that ruled the world for hundreds of years were gone. It just took the destruction of a continent and 30 million people dying. So, you know, so be it, right? I'm not condoning war. I'm just saying it worked. So there we go, right? You know, slavery is another one that it's funny how we actually have moved forward just in fits and starts. That in Roman times, they enslaved everybody. They were totally not racist about slavery, right? If Rome attacked you and you fought back and you lost, they took you as slaves. They enslaved the Greeks, who looked just like them, right? Genetically, almost identical. They enslaved Egyptians, right? They enslaved everybody. I'm not saying it's really progress, but by the 16th century, when the Portuguese were really pushing building the slavery industry, because they had all these colonies in Central and South America that needed labor, they were like, well, we're only going to enslave Black people from Africa. And if you had stood up then and said, excuse me, I think it's wrong to enslave people no matter what their color, my guess is they would have laughed you out of the room. Everyone knew that it was fine to enslave people as long as they were, quote, subhuman, right? The Nazis did it with the Jews. They didn't just enslave them, they enacted mass executions. But over the centuries and millennia, I would hope most of us are at the place now we can say, you know what? Slavery is wrong. We should not own other humans and take away their free will. I don't care what their skin color or what language they speak or what customs they adopt, right? And our lives are the same. If you look at your soul history, you've made a lot of progress, every single one of us. But it's, you know, I like to think of the progression of consciousness as sort of like the stock market. It's not a simple linear up and to the right, is it? No. The stock market goes up and it goes down, and it goes up and it goes down. But over time, it goes a lot higher, even beyond inflation. Does that help?
Yeah, I love the mapping from the past to the present, and a little bit about where we've come from in that regard. And it makes me think about, where are we going? Like, if Brent has his way,
Yeah,
and we engage, I don't know, 80% of the world in awakening, and over the next 2 years we could awaken the majority of people, like, what does that look like? Can you paint a picture?
yeah, sure. For those that want to go deeper, the best book I've read on this, it's called Spiral Dynamics, Beck and Cohen. It was released in the 90s. That essentially there is a natural spiral to the evolution of consciousness, and you can't skip steps. And it's both personal and societal. And to use their terminologies, which they call memes, they give them colors. And roughly, the orange meme is capitalism. Sort of the United States, Europe in the 19th century, sort of the epitome of orange. Capitalism, making money, profit, right? The next step of the spiral is green. That's roughly Northern Europe in the late 20th century, socialism. Taking care of the people. Everyone has enough to eat, enough medical care, a place to sleep, right? But every meme has its problems. The obvious problem with the orange is inequality, exploitation. In the 19th century, if you got hurt at work, they just fired you. Sorry. And your family had to starve. It was that simple. Now in the 20th century, we have some protections. I'm not saying they're great, but if you get hurt at work, your employer is required through insurance to provide you with a stipend as well as medical care, right? The problem with the green is that people get lazy and game the system. And the bloat expands to the place where the system will collapse under its own weight. Because if everyone goes, hey, why should I work when I can just have a good life on unemployment, and no one works, the whole thing collapses, right? As if no one's working, no one's paying the taxes to provide those services. And so the solution is to jump to the next level of the spiral. And it's really fascinating that when I look back at my tech companies in the 90s, I didn't think about it this way at the time. I was trying to lead my companies to jump the spiral. That one of the ideas I had that my partners didn't go along with was, I thought we should have total salary transparency, that the books should be open, that any member of the company can go and look at the books and see how much things cost and where the money is going and what the rent is and blah, 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 and how much everyone gets paid, how many dinners the company paid for the CEO, right? But my partners weren't up to it. So part of it is transparency. Nothing's hidden. If you want to know what someone's done or how much money they make, you can go look it up. Why? All the evil, the corruption festers in the darkness. It's that simple. And of course, there's privacy concerns, but, I don't want to get into a political issue, but I would certainly be okay with letting everyone look up how much money I make on the internet if it meant that transparency would end a lot of the corruption and greed and exploitation in the world, right? And so I think part of it's transparency. Another part of it is recognizing that every living thing has value, and that objectifying living things isn't for the best. And if we look at the way we treat our food animals, that's part of it. That when we treat them horribly and we justify it as, well, who cares, they're animals, that's not just bad for the animals, but you guys know it's bad for us too, right? What do you think happens when cattle are lining up to be slaughtered and they see their friends and loved ones being killed in horrible, violent ways right in front of them? You think that's going to make the meat healthy? No. Animal's going to fill its body with stress hormones, and it goes into the meat, and then we eat it. And we wonder why we're so stressed out. I'm not saying that's the only reason, but it's pouring fuel on the fire, right? So we'll see transparency. And it'll be in government and in families and in industry. We'll recognize that every life and living thing has value, but that also, in order for the system to work, we must be willing to volunteer. there must be a shared sacrifice. And I think that's another really important part of it. That I'll just use hunger as an example. If, Nick, you came in with a plan and said, hey, Brent, we're going to have a worldwide referendum tomorrow. Would you be willing to give up 1% of your income if you knew that a transparent system would be set up to make sure every person on the planet has enough nutritious food? I would say yes. The only reason I'd be hesitant would be it's another big government grab that's going to get corrupted and someone's going to steal the money, and it's not going to work that way, right? Because that happens. So there would be the spirit of shared sacrifice, recognizing that this is an important problem. And I'm not saying that European governments are all correct. They got their own problems, right? But one of the differences I see between American and a lot of the, especially Northern European governments, is here people are just like, hell no, don't raise my taxes. I don't trust the government. From my friends and clients in Europe, there's more a sense of, we recognize we must pay taxes, but we want to make sure the money is spent well and wisely. And if it is, we're okay with that. And again, I'm speaking in broad strokes, right? Not every American, European government fits that model. So this transparency, this recognition that everyone and everything matters, this spirit of shared sacrifice to solve a big problem. Those are some of the hallmarks of a world that's very awake. And, one thing we said earlier, no one has to do anything. So those that are called to the dirty jobs are paid more and given much more respect. Because I would imagine some poor working family where both the parents have 2 jobs just to have enough money to be broke all the time, and they're constantly sleep deprived and their child doesn't have good nutrition and all that, that sacrifice and hard work should be rewarded, not pitied or mocked. But we're still at the place in our society where most of us would mock someone and at best pity them. I like to think that the reason that Mother Teresa went to the slums of Calcutta was she saw everyone as her. And she had her own struggles and demons, right? She wasn't perfect. None of us are. But part of her recognized that this is me. And most of us, if you were hungry, you'd go get food for yourself, wouldn't you? Right. So the last thing I'll say here is we need to expand the I thought. I'd say in our modern world, most people's I thought ends at their own skin. If you're doing a little better, your I thought expands to your immediate family. Maybe your spouse and children, maybe your parents, maybe your siblings. In very few people, it goes past that. We need to have a much bigger I thought. First, to encompass our city, our state, our nation, eventually the whole world. But even that we need to expand because that's just the humans on the planet. We need to expand the I thought to be the animals and the weather and the rocks and the ocean, right? And why stop at the Earth? Why not include your I thought to be the whole solar system and so on, right? So there's a long answer to a short question.
Yeah, great answer. I feel like it's a good time to switch to maybe taking some questions.
Yeah,
from
we've
everybody on the
yacked plenty
call.
here. Let's spend the rest of our time with shares and questions. So shares and questions, people. We'll put on the gallery.
I'll share that.
Yeah.
I can share that. We pat ourselves on the back because we eliminated slavery. But what most people don't realize that slavery has gone underground and there's more slaves now in the world
Yes.
than there ever were before. And it's called human trafficking and sex slavery.
Yep.
And the United States is absolutely rampant with it.
Yep.
Unbelievably. There's a movie coming out on July 4th called The Sound of Freedom, and it's about that topic.
Absolutely. And it's interesting how in at least American culture, when we see a problem, we love to go make war on our problems. And before the drug wars of the 1970s and 80s, a lot of drugs, except for a small list, were still legal. And the drug war hasn't solved the problem. It's pushed it underground and created this huge underground economy And now those drugs are a bigger problem than they ever were, right? And I think Linda's correct. Slavery is the same. We outlawed it in broad daylight, but now it happens in the darkness. And waging war on something in the darkness doesn't work because you don't know what you're fighting. Where do you find it, right? In Napoleonic times, war was simpler. You had your armies, they march in formation. You take the enemy's capital, you won the war. Then if we look at the war in Afghanistan or Vietnam, that was fighting the darkness. That you don't know where the enemy is or how many of them there are. You can't distinguish friend from foe. So is it any surprise that the only two wars the United States has lost are Afghanistan and Vietnam? All the wars where the other side wears uniforms and line up on the field of battle, the U.S. has won. And it is double ironic that, in case you guys didn't know, I'm not sure Americans invented that kind of warfare, but we certainly developed it and perfected it during the Revolution. Yep. Sharon, go ahead.
I love the word I thought, and I am looking to expand in my industry, expand on something that, sorry about the camera, expand on something that seems very stationary. In other words, everything that we do is very rote. It's the same thing all the time.
Yep.
And I know that there are better ways to do it. And the word I thought really resonates with the expansion of that. Can you speak a little bit about expanding on stationary process?
I love the concept of I thought, because the journey of consciousness is largely the expansion of the I thought. And, it's what I would say is it's tough to get people to make a change that they're not forced into. Not impossible. If you're able to find forward-thinking people, you can extrapolate forward and show them, hey, if we keep doing things in this same stagnant way, these problems will fester and only get worse. And at some point become a problem we can't solve. That can be a challenge, though, especially when things get politicized. Because as soon as it gets politicized, all logic and reason and basis and fact goes right out the window. That one of the problems with modern political culture is no one can be convinced of anything anymore. Everyone thinks their side has all the answers. One of the ways I like to think about this is, well, if X% of the population fervently believes one thing and Y% of the population fervently believes something the exact opposite, clearly one group is wrong, right? At least. So I use that internally to push myself off of these deeply entrenched belief systems. Going, well, if everyone is convinced they're right, clearly they can't all be correct. Same thing with religion. It seems like every religion claims to be the one true path to God, and everything else is a fraud, a deception, and should be destroyed or segregated or something, right? There was a hilarious series of South Park when they explored this, and they go up to heaven, and on South Park they go, oh my God, the Mormons were right, everyone else was wrong, right? Which was hilarious. Yeah. One could envision one where Scientology is right and everyone else is wrong. And so with religion, the same thing. I would say to myself, hey, given there's all these different religions that claim to be the one true path to God, clearly, if not all of them are wrong, at most one of them can be right. So maybe what we hold deeply as deeply held beliefs is true. Maybe we're wrong about that. Does that make sense? But it can be difficult because you need forward-thinking people.
Yeah.
And most people, as long as things are working well enough for them today, don't care. It's somebody else's problem. I'm not accusing anyone here of this, but most people in the world just don't care that they're starving children. As long as they live in another place, have a different skin color, and speak a different language, I don't care. So, you have to kind of work with it. And if you don't know what to do on the outside, start on the inside.
Thank you.
Like a bad marriage. Maybe divorce isn't a practical option. Maybe your spouse won't go to counseling. Okay. Do what you can on your side from the inside. Because we all want more money to solve our problems, but it doesn't really work as well as we think, right? Your money problems aren't problems with money, they're you problems. If you can shift your consciousness, your energy, your behaviors, there's no problem. Other shares, questions? Going once, going twice. If not, we will finish up. I am going to just look up for you guys when the next session is and what we're going to be covering. So last chance for questions, comments. All right, so it looks like
I want to, there's something that just keeps coming to me right now after you were talking about not everybody thinks about, starving people elsewhere.
Yep.
And I get this thought, this image of, bacteria and amoeba eating up their environment. And where our concepts of the I thought, and that growing is in essence our memology growing to inhabit more and more and more physical space.
Mm-hmm.
And there are going to be others out there that aren't necessarily combined, and it is our drive for continued survival and thrival and increasing our capacity to do whatever we were inbuilt to do, that drives that. And so it's not necessarily a problem that somebody else doesn't feel that way. It is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to expand ourselves and potentially bring somebody else into our I thought, engage them into our process, or leave them to be as they are.
Yep.
In our shared environment.
Yeah. One of the big challenges we run into is that there's a couple beliefs most people seem to hold that screw up the world. One is the belief that if I hurt someone else, it will help heal me. A lot of us run that, right? Another is that we all think that we know from our mind and ego what's going to be best for us in our life. Almost all humans work absolutely convinced every moment of every day of their lives that they know for certain what's going to be best for them. And again, most of us are wrong most of the time. So I think willingness to be wrong is high up on the list of what we need to change. Because how can you bring people together if no one's willing to be wrong about anything? You can't. So, let go of those beliefs. Hurting someone is not going to heal you. It usually will just make your pain worse. That people that get revenge will say you get a brief respite where it feels good, and then it's even worse than before. It's like getting drunk because your back hurts. Yeah, you can get drunk, and you will get a respite from the pain for a few hours. But then you're going to wake up tomorrow with a hangover and everything's going to be inflamed from the alcohol and your back pain is worse. So harming others will not heal you, not over the long run. And none of us is nearly as accurate as we think for what's going to be best for us in our lives. If we're willing to let those things go, I think it opens the door to serious change. Serious change. And if you guys want to understand what's going on in politics today, go study Nazi Germany. A lot of what's going on is right out of the fascist playbook. Yep. Never admit you're wrong, double down on everything, always find a scapegoat, emotional appeals, short-term thinking. Yep.
Don't you think that one of our tools that we've learned in Awakening Dynamics, which is sending unconditional love and support, if we use that, if all of us use that every day on the whole world, that would help to raise the consciousness?
It would.
Don't you think?
Well, the studies on mass prayer have shown that to affect the world, we need at least 10,000 people working together.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have that, you got to focus more local.
Okay.
So if you don't, start with yourself, your home, your family, right? we get 2 or 5 or 8 people, maybe we can do your neighborhood. The magic number is the square root of 1%. So you take 1% of the population, take the square root of that. That's how many people you need, right? So if there's 100 people in your community, all you need is you. The square root of 1% is 1 of 100 is 1. If there's 1 million people, well, 1% would be what? 10,000. And the square root of that would be 100. So you need 100 people at least to change 1 million. So Las Vegas has roughly 1 million people that live here. If I could get me and 100 some of my healer friends to all work together, I think we could change some things on a local scale. Yep. The trouble is working with healers is often like herding cats. That a lot of people have their fixed ideas of how it is and how it should be. And again, we have to have transparency, willingness to compromise, spirit of shared sacrifice, all those things. But it would be an interesting thing. I'd love to do experiments with that. We would just need enough people, right? That was one of the reasons I started the VIP club, 15 years ago, was to get enough people together that we could do some shared healing and prayer and change things on at least a local level. You know, the numbers just haven't been nearly as big as I had hoped for. You know, if you have 8 people show up, that's great, but you're very limited on what you can do. You know, local area for sure. You can change your life, your families, yes. Much beyond that, yeah, just not enough.
Brent, there's already experiments being done on a global level.
Yep.
There's something called the field. I'm not sure exactly
Yep.
who's running it, but
Yep.
I'm on
There
some
are
email lists
some
where they do
large scale experiments being done in mass prayer, and I follow them loosely, but I think it's really interesting. I think that is going to be one of the tools we're going to use to save the world. If we could get just 10,000 people working together, aligning their consciousness, willing to let go of their petty rivalries and differences, we could make a worldwide change. Good luck with that, right? But again, we all have to be willing to be wrong, to let go, to do all these things that no one wants to do. Very easy to say it's their fault, it's their problem, right? All right, any other shares or questions, go for it. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up. Our next session is in 2 weeks on July 13th. Melinda will be leading on the subject of brainwaves. So you don't want to miss that. All right, last call for questions. So thank you, Nick, for joining us and giving a great interview. All right, well, I suppose good afternoon, good morning, good night, depending on where you live. Goodbye until next time. And for everyone, take care. Namaste. See you next time.